When we were young, we went with our parents to church. We went to some form of Bible school, church school, and we developed a faith. Our faith was probably that of a child. And for many people, they stopped going to church often when they went to high school. And so when, during their adulthood, challenges to their faith arise, like your wife or your husband leaves you, you develop a serious illness, a child of yours dies, you begin to then doubt whether there is a God, doubt why God would allow suffering, and you begin to lose your faith. Those thoughts struck me all my life. And so, since I was with you a couple of years ago, I wrote another book, this one called A Bridge to God, that answers questions like, does God exist? Is Jesus Christ really the Son of God? Does God really love you? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God allow suffering? The questions that make people doubt their faith. The point here is that, a lot of us become lost sheep. And these challenges that hit us during our lifetime challenge our faith. That's the principle behind people who have turned away, not just from believing in God, but also from moral behavior. And Jesus tells two stories, two parables, to help people understand. The first of these is the one of the lost sheep. Interestingly, if a sheep, somehow gets separated from the herd, and all of a sudden they realize they're lost, they just lay down. They will not move. And so, if the person who is their owner doesn't find the sheep dies. And so you can imagine, someone finding this lost sheep. And the sheep will not just sort of come. The owner literally has to pick up the sheep, put it over his shoulders, holding the front and back legs, and then walk the sheep back to the herd. In which case, at what time the sheep kind of like springs back to life. Well, sheep are a very expensive commodity. And so therefore, losing one of them, yes, you'd want to spend some time trying to find that sheep. So is it odd that Jesus is spending time on the one lost sheep who is the sinner? No. The other story is equally interesting, namely that there's a woman, obviously a poor woman, who only has 10 silver coins. And while it may be nothing to you or I to lose one of those coins, for her, this is 1/10 of all she owns. And the story you may not have caught makes it clear she's poor because she lights a candle. The only light in wherever she's living is the door. And if she opens the door, you can see a little bit, but you can't see a lot. So therefore she lights a candle to then sweep the floor to find the coin. To put it more in perspective, imagine that you have $10,000 and you lost one, or you have $100,000 and you lost 10. All of a sudden, whoa, this becomes more serious. But you get the point that you search for what you have lost. And I think, again, Jesus wants us, those few, the remnant, who actually come to church on Sunday, to help find lost sheep out there. You may say, me? I'm not worthy to be able to do that. Well, yes, you are. And that's where the story of Timothy comes in, the second reading. Paul met Timothy, who lived in a town called Lystra, which was in Asia Minor, today's Turkey. And he went through, in his first missionary journey, came into Lystra. And Timothy was a young man, and his grandmother, whose name was Lois, converted and became a Christian. His mother, Eunice, was a Jew, but eventually converted. And the father was Roman, and he was referred to in the readings as a pagan, because he was not a Christian. But the point is that Paul, met Timothy at this point, 47 AD, and the family, and they became friends. Well, 2 years later, when Paul is making his second journey, year 49, he comes through the same town, and he asks, and Timothy wants to come with him, and Paul says, all right. But Timothy, he discovers, is a very timid, shy, reserved guy who always kind of doubts his strength. But Paul, was kind of then encouraging him. And Timothy came along and became one of Paul's trusted helpers. Paul would send Timothy to various communities to see how things are going, especially when they were going not so well, to like Corinth and Philippi, which took a certain amount of then self-confidence and courage, to go into a place where he doesn't have Paul who was talking for him, and to somehow ask what the problem is and try to help solve the problem, and then report back to Paul. Well, years later, Paul is arrested in Jerusalem, and because he is a Roman citizen, he's entitled to a trial, and he gets sent to Rome, and is put in they call it a house arrest. So it's not like a jail, but it's a home in which he can't leave. And that is from the year 61 to 63 AD. And during that period of time, Timothy, and last week, Onesimus, if you remember, come in to try to help Paul during those 3 years when he was there. Well, when finally Paul is found innocent and is released, he sends Timothy to Ephesus to become the overseer, the bishop of Ephesus. The word bishop means overseer, sort of looking over everything and helping those who are the ministers there. And Timothy gets some problems going on there, and so Paul writes in this letter somewhere around the year 64 AD. And he encourages him again, and he says, because Timothy is probably thinking, I can't do this. And Timothy apparently had like a face that looked much younger. You've probably known people that had a baby face. I remember having a graduate student once, and he was scared to do counseling because I sent him in to do marriage counseling for a couple who, said, this kid's going to do marriage counseling. And he wasn't a kid. He was well into his 20s, but he looked like a kid. So Timothy must have been something like that. But so Paul is saying, look, okay, so you're somewhat timid, so you kind of look young, but you've been, think back, think of all the things you've done for me. You have the strength, you can do it. And then he says, but if you doubt that, look at me. And I think I told you a long time ago, I was sent to St. Paul's Seminary, which was part of actually the University of Ottawa in Canada, a seminary. And as seminarians would, in a seminary, like you see, like in the sanctuary, the pews are normally this way. Well, the whole chapel in the seminary, that way, because everyone was going to become a priest. And up above were these murals depicting the life of St. Paul. And being young, and sometimes the sermon being kind of boring, I would look up and your mind would drift off and look at these pictures. And Paul was portrayed as being this tall, dark, handsome man. Well, later on in my studies, I was shocked to find out that Paul was short, fat, bald, had bow legs. He wasn't an attractive looking man at all. And so Paul is kind of telling Timothy too, look, I didn't look that imposing either, but I did what I had to do. So you look young, so you're a little timid. So what? You can do it. I believe in you. I believe in you, Timothy. And he said, even worse, I used to persecute the church. He was the one that traveled to Damascus to arrest Christians when he was knocked off his horse and met Jesus. Well, Timothy obviously goes on to do a great job in Ephesus. And interestingly, the story is that in the year 97 AD, there was a festival for the goddess Diana. And he went to protest, that this festival should not occur because there's only one God. And Timothy was beaten to death at that point, murdered. So he, turned into the person who Paul knew he could turn into, the strong person to reach out to other people. Well, by the same token, you can reach out to other people. Well, but it's kind of awkward. How do I do that? And interestingly, within the letter, Paul sort of gives like a segue. Namely, okay, suppose, in your travels, in your lifetime here, you'll meet all kinds of people. And if you become friends with them, probably by doing things for them, helping them out when they're in trouble, offering to help them when they need help, a friendship begins to build, a relationship begins to build. And because you were compassionate, all of a sudden there's a connection with that person. Well, because of that connection then, when that person you see has got questions, maybe has doubted their faith, maybe has moved away from believing, then you can talk to them. And then they will listen because they know you care. A stranger, probably not. They'll just blow you off. But if you are a friend, a proven friend, they'll listen. And that's how you reach out to a lost sheep. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's important. And, I've had opportunities to do that. It's, I've belonged to a community where I play a lot of golf. I wish I was good at it, but I'm not. But you develop friendships because of that. And then all of a sudden I discover, that some people have all kinds of issues. And I'll ask if they want to talk about that. Some do, some don't. But at least the opportunity was presented to them. Well, you'll have opportunities that will flow to you as well to talk to other people. And why you don't think of yourself as an apostle? The apostles were fishermen. They weren't exactly, college professors. They weren't people that you would think would be, the leaders of the community. And yet they were. And so, like on All Saints Day, the message is really, hey, if they could do it, you could do it. Those saints are pretty ordinary. But they did extraordinary things. We're ordinary, but we can do extraordinary things. And you think of the community here of St. Mark's. And, you almost think, well, we're kind of down a little bit. We were knocked down a bit. But interestingly, I found that is the time when you are the strongest. Because people are going to think you're the weakest. And yet, when you, know that you're still loved by God, you still have a strong relationship with God, and you have an amazing relationship with one another, that's impressive. I've known you longer than as many in terms of clergy, and I've always been impressed with you. I've always been impressed with your strength. And so therefore, I guess I'm being Paul to Timothy. You're Timothy, I'm Paul. I'm telling you, I'm no great shakes either, but, you're pretty good. If I can do it, you can do it. So that's the message. Go out there and find a lost sheep.
Amen.
Amen.